My name is Mira Ellison, and at 31 I finally learned what it costs to be the good daughter. I grew up in Willowmere, Massachusetts, a coastal town with postcard streets and shutters painted to match hydrangeas. From the sidewalk, our blue Victorian looked like a promise. Sunlit bay window, white fence, flower boxes spilling over. Inside, it was an echo chamber for my mother's expectations. Evelyn Ward, 66, unrumpled, beloved chair of every committee worth having, lived for applause. Her hair never moved. Her smile did, but not for me. Shoulders back, Mira. And that dress widens you. At 6 I learned posture. At 12 I learned silence. Dr. Peter Ward, my father, buffered the blows with warm hands and gentler words. He stuck my crooked watercolors around his clinic, pride like sunlight. When his heart failed the winter I turned 16, warmth left with him. My mother's critiques lost their leash and bit. My sister, Serena, had already sprinted to New York. Pristine job title, pristine marriage, pristine children in framed prints. I stayed nearby, turning down a West Coast design scholarship because Mom felt faint whenever I mentioned distance. Doctors never found anything wrong. Distance itself was the diagnosis, and I became the pill. I climbed at a small marketing agency, built a life 3 streets from my mother's house, learned to suture deadlines to errands. Prescriptions, gutters, groceries. Promotions came, approval didn't. By my 31st birthday I'd become creative director. A small town title, my mother said, buttering a roll like I'd served her disappointment for dinner. When she turned 66 I decided to earn what I could never buy, her pride. I planned a private dinner at Marcelli's. White tablecloths, blown glass chandeliers, lilies and blue hydrangea centerpieces. I invited her coterie, saved for a vintage sapphire brooch she once admired. I even begged Serena to come. It would be perfect, I thought. I was wrong. The day of the dinner, my phone pinged with instructions disguised as concern. Mira, tell the chef. No garlic. Did you confirm? What time will Serena arrive? Don't make a spectacle. Keep it simple. I'd already confirmed the allergy 3 times. Serena texted that she and Thomas were driving. I wore a navy dress my mother would deem conservative enough, and pearls my father gave me when I turned 18. I practiced a smile that didn't tremble. At her house she opened the door in a robe. 15 minutes until we need to leave, I said. I can't be rushed, she answered, eyes scanning me like a failed draft. I steamed her matching navy dress and watched the clock expire. We arrived at Marcelli's late. Everyone was corralled in the bar, Serena glowing with punctuality. Mama, we thought you'd skip your own party, Serena teased. Evelyn laughed, a sound so warm I hardly recognized it, then tilted her head toward me. Mira lost track of time. You know how she is. I swallowed the truth. I'd been waiting. Tonight wasn't about defending myself. It was about delivering perfection. The private rooms sparkled. Place cards curled in elegant script, lilies and hydrangeas breathed their fragrance, and the chandeliers threw diamonds of light across crystal. You've thought of everything, said Eleanor Hart, my mother's oldest friend. Evelyn pursed her mouth. Lilies at dinner? The scent will drown the food. Eleanor gave me a look that felt like a hand on the shoulder. We ate. Serena told a London story in polished anecdote. Thomas listed schools the way some list saints. My mother's pride shone at every syllable. When I tried to share news about a campaign my team had won, Evelyn lifted an empty glass. Mira, more water. After the lemon cake appeared, candles lit, Harold called for a speech. My mother rose, wineglass poised. Blessings, she said, eyes sweeping the table, catching on Serena, on Thomas, on photos of grandchildren she kept in her purse. Then she landed on me. And Mira, dependable always. Present. Laughter quivered and died. They say at my age you choose joy and remove stress. So if I could have one perfect gift it would be this. Mira, leave my life. Let me breathe. The room stopped breathing for her. Chairs squeaked, forks hovered. Even the candles seemed to hold their breath. Mother, Serena said softly but offered the rescue rope to no one. Evelyn's smile was razor thin. I'm speaking my truth, darling. The box with the sapphire brooch burned in my hand. I stood on legs that felt borrowed and said, "Excuse me." The restaurant's hum swallowed me whole as I walked into night air that tasted like rain. I heard my name once, Serena's voice, tentative, and didn't turn. In my car, I placed the small gift on the passenger seat like a witness and stared at nothing until the first tear surprised me with its quiet. Not crushing sobs, just a long steady stream from a well I had kept locked. She wants me gone, I told the mirror later in the bright, too honest light of my bathroom. Maybe I want that too. I didn't sleep. I made lists at the kitchen table while the house whispered its emptiness. I googled attorneys, trusts, interstate routes. By dawn a plan breathed. I called in sick. I met Ava Delgado, a lawyer with a grave, competent kindness. I explained, my voice oddly factual as I lined up years of paper cuts and last night's knife. I don't want revenge, I said. I want absence. A clean one. Ava measured my resolve, then referred me to Colin Mercer, an estate and financial specialist. You have 2 joint accounts with your mother, he said, scanning numbers. Emptying them could look like exploitation given her age. Freezing and converting to a needs-based trust protects her care, and protects you. I left with a map written in legalese and permission to step out of my life. That evening I watched the brooch catch lamplight and wondered how to return a gift to someone who didn't want it, and had asked for me instead. I moved like a surgeon. Quick sale buyers toured my small, carefully renovated house. The offer was lower than its worth. Speed was worth more than profit. I opened new bank accounts in different institutions. I resigned after 13 years at the agency with a short call and a longer email. My boss sounded stunned and kind. I packed a life into 4 piles. Sell, donate, store, take. Take was smaller than I imagined. Clothes, laptop, camera, my grandmother's quilt, a few photos where I still recognized my own face. Serena's texts multiplied. Where did you go after dinner? Mom says you emptied everything. Are you safe? I typed and deleted a dozen answers, then sent 3 words. I need space. My mother sent nothing. Silence can be a form of applause when the performance pleases the right audience. Colin and I finalized the trust. A professional trustee, medical and home expenses approved with documentation, no lump sums, full transparency. I wrote Serena a letter to be delivered a week after I left. Statements, receipts, a clear ledger of years I'd underwrote fixed income, while my mother bought image and comfort. I didn't include a return address. I didn't owe the past my coordinates. On my last night I slept on a camping mat in an echoing bedroom. Morning came bright and strange. I signed closing papers at 8, dropped the sapphire brooch in a padded envelope with a note. You asked for another gift. I'm returning this one. May you find the peace you're looking for. Goodbye. And watched Willowmere recede in my rearview mirror by 9:30. I didn't have a destination, only direction. West felt like oxygen. Somewhere behind me, a version of myself blinked in an empty house. Somewhere ahead, a coastline I'd only seen on postcards waited like a promise I was finally making to me. Highway turned to horizon. Horizon turned to courage. I kept the old phone powered off in my glove box. Triage only. I created a new email with a name that didn't echo. I drove past cities that devour anonymity and chose back roads where gas stations sell coffee that tastes like penance. I paid cash. I breathed. The country redrew itself outside my window. Cornfields, weather-worried barns, a lake so blue it felt fake. By night 6 the air smelled like cedar and rain. The Pacific Northwest wasn't dramatic the way postcards promise. It was insistent, green on green, fog like a hand across the brow. On a coastline map I picked a dot called Gray Harbor because it sounded like a place that kept secrets. The main street was 3 blocks of snacks and necessity, a clinic with hand-painted letters, and a real estate office with a bulletin board of rentals curling at the corners. There it was. Furnished cottage above the bay, month to month, available immediately. The porch leaned. The windows stuck. Every room watched water. It looked like a place built for someone who wanted to hear her own thoughts. I signed as Elena Davis, middle name plus the street I grew up on. Not clever, just quiet. What brings you to Gray Harbor? Asked the property manager, handing over keys attached to a whale-shaped fob. Change of scenery, I said, the way you say I can't breathe without inviting a CPR class. I'm a freelance designer. I can work from anywhere. True enough. I spun up a clean website for Elena Davis Design, picked up small contracts from platforms that don't care who you used to be, only whether you meet a deadline. That night, fog stitched the water to the sky. I stood at the tilted railing, the keys warm in my palm, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not safety, something braver. Permission. Routines save us before insight does. In Gray Harbor, mine began at Breakwater Coffee, a narrow shop with a bell that rang like a laugh and a chalkboard menu crowded with variables. Diane ran the place. 50-something salt and pepper hair triaged into a messy bun, the weather written into the lines around her eyes. She learned my Americano by day 2 and my silence by day 5. "You're new," she said on morning 5, setting down my cup. "Is it that obvious? In a town like this, newness glows. Don't worry, people leave each other alone unless they don't. You look like someone who needs the first kind." She glanced at the flyer she was taping up. "Festival next weekend, wild stuff. Folks stay out till 9. I cracked a smile that didn't cut my mouth. Back at the cottage I checked the old phone. Serena had sent a flurry, texts that oscillated between concern and accusation, and a photo of my mother beaming from a hospital bed surrounded by flowers. The caption, "Panic attack, not a heart attack. She's upset you froze the accounts. Bills are piling up." A local paper link followed. "Respected community figure left without funds by daughter." The words, "elder financial abuse," snapped in place like a trap. Someone had even started a fundraiser with my mother's maiden name glamour shot. My hands shook. I closed my laptop, then opened it again because the first rule of manipulation is control the narrative. A direct message pinged on my professional account. "Dr. Maya Chin, my mother's physician. I can't share details, but she's stable and not in grave danger. Take care of yourself." It landed in me like a life raft. Small, sufficient. I walked to Breakwater. Diane slid the cup over without speaking, then said, "When I left my ex, he told everyone I'd abandoned him when he was sick. He was fine. I would have died staying. Ask yourself, if you go back, what changes?" I pictured my mother's smile at Marcelli's, how the room chose the gravity of her story over the truth. I pictured my own lungs in a fist. "Nothing," I said. "Nothing changes." I called Colin Mercer. "They're using words like abandonment and abuse," I said. "Issue a statement," he replied. "We'll release the trust terms. Documented care covered, utilities paid, legitimate expenses approved. No lump sums. Full oversight. Also," I added, "tell Serena I'm safe. Tell her the trust stands. Tell her I won't be returning to that relationship." When I hung up, I wrote 27 pages. Not a defense, a record. Dates, texts where love was a ledger, messages where my wins became warnings, voicemails with concern sharpened into knives. I attached receipts that showed my deposits into fixed income years, the cleaners, the prescriptions, the stair lift estimates my mother mocked as ugly. I sent everything to Colin with instructions. Share with Serena if she asks again. On the trust portal, I saw fresh requests denied. $5,000 emergency medical with no documentation. $3,000 for home repairs without quotes. $10,000 to Serena labeled temporary support. The trustee had done exactly what the rules demanded. Paid the pharmacy, the power company, the cleaning service. Refused cash withdrawals dressed as necessity. I walked the harbor until the air ironed my thoughts. For the first time since I'd driven west, certainty settled inside me like a stone that knew the bottom. I wasn't abandoning an elder in need. I was ending a story that had assigned me the role of rescuer and villain both. At dusk, the bay turned the color of old silver. I thought of the brooch making its quiet way back to a house with a white fence and a woman who believed fences keep people in. "I release you," I whispered, to her or to me I couldn't tell. Maybe both. Clarity has a way of breeding structure. I asked Colin to amend the trust. Monthly statements to both Evelyn and Serena. Detailed reasons for any denial, and one new condition: before any discretionary funds beyond basic living expenses are approved, 6 therapy sessions documented by the provider. "She'll hate it," Colin said. "Then it's probably right," I answered. Serena's email arrived 2 days later through Colin, subject line thin as breath. I didn't know. She wrote about the documents she'd read, the messages that cut her as they'd cut me, the way she'd been the golden one because someone had to be, and how that acceptance made her complicit. She told me the fundraiser had been taken down. Mom was furious, then defensive, then, something I've never seen, quiet, she wrote. If you ever want to rebuild something with me away from Mom, I'll follow your pace. I'll respect your boundaries. I'm sorry for every time I turned away because it was easier. I cried the good kind of crying, the kind that salts a wound clean. I printed her email and brought it to Dr. Noor Patel, the therapist I'd found in Grey Harbor when I realized geography doesn't cauterize memory. Part of me wants to believe her, I said. Part of me is waiting for the old choreography. Both parts are wise, Dr. Patel said. What terms would make connection safe? Distance at first. Honesty even when it's ugly. No triangulation. No pressure to reconcile with our mother. That's a contract with yourself, she said. Good. Keep signing it. That night I answered Serena with 3 truths. I need time. I'm open to careful, limited communication. My privacy is not negotiable. I pressed send and felt a seam inside me stitch itself with steadier thread. When smear campaigns fail, the story often changes costumes. A letter came through Colin, my mother's first direct words since the dinner. It was an aria of the non-apology. I'm sorry you felt hurt. I never intended drastic outcomes. If I was hard on you, it's because I wanted the best. She added that she'd agree to counseling to satisfy the trust, though at my age it's absurd. It was a posture of benevolence that kept the crown polished. I brought the letter to Dr. Patel. This is reconciliation without accountability, she said. Notice how she centers reasonableness and frames your boundary as extremity. So, no change? I asked. Change can start small, but it begins with naming harm without parentheses. Dr. Patel's gaze was steady. You don't have to reopen a door to stand in the hallway and listen. I replied through Colin, brief, factual. I acknowledge receipt. I'm glad you're speaking with a therapist. I'm focusing on my own healing and not ready for direct contact. The trust will continue as structured. It was the first time I'd written to my mother without asking, explaining, or appeasing. The sentence that mattered most wasn't there at all. No more hooks. Weeks dialed down the volume. Serena reported that our mother attended therapy with Dr. Aaron Wolf. Arms crossed, then looser, then sometimes open. Serena began practicing her own small rebellion, saying no to shopping on workdays, no to guilt that wears a cardigan. It felt like stepping onto a frozen pond, she told me on a video call. It held. In Grey Harbor, I learned the names of the rocks just offshore and the way fog erases and returns the world. I woke to the gulls arguing with the wind and went to sleep to water tapping pilings. I was becoming someone my mother would not recognize and my father might finally see. Life doesn't explode into place, it accrues. Small contracts became steady work. I redesigned a local bookstore's site and Margaret, the owner, paid me in checks and paperbacks. Sophia, a retired teacher with paint under her nails, hired me for a studio portfolio. Lily pressed a flyer into my hand and got me hiking cliffs that looked like the edges of maps. Diane at Breakwater started keeping a mug for me behind the counter as if to say, you belong. I realized I was less Mira in exile and more Elena on purpose. A woman who sleeps with the windows cracked to hear the tide, who knows the exact minute the sun slices the bay in late October, who keeps a paddle leaning against the porch because the first calm day after a storm is holy. Serena asked if she could visit. Alone, no ambushes, no surprises. Not yet, I said, and meant maybe soon. It wasn't fear. It was respect for the scaffolding I was building inside myself. 3 months after the dinner, another letter arrived from my mother. Shorter, quieter, a different temperature. A real apology is not a performance. It is a sentence that looks you in the eye. Dr. Wolf has helped me see the harm I did. Not sometimes. Consistently. I'm sorry, Mira. I am proud of your courage to put yourself first. If there is ever a way forward, I'll follow your terms. I read it 3 times, searching for the familiar tripwires and finding fewer than before. It didn't erase the years. It didn't buy reunion. But it planted something tender in a scorched field. The idea that my leaving hadn't just saved me, it had forced sunlight into a house that preferred the curtains closed. The second letter from my mother lay on the table like a live wire. Shorter than her usual, stripped of the ornaments she favored, it startled me. I was cruel. Not occasionally, not for your own good, but consistently and without reason. I see it now. I am sorry. My hands trembled. I had spent years praying for those words, then more years certain they'd never arrive. Now, when I had finally loosened her grip from my life, she whispered them on paper. I walked the shoreline with the letter folded in my pocket, waves rattling the stones like dice. Was it enough to erase years of eroded self-worth? No. Was it enough to spark something fragile inside me? Yes. I could feel the tiniest crack in the wall I'd built, not to let her back in, but to let myself hope that maybe I hadn't been unlovable after all. Dr. Patel listened as I read the letter aloud during our session. "It's progress," she said, "but notice she asks nothing. It's good. She admits harm, but she doesn't demand forgiveness. That gives you space to decide what these words mean for you." I pressed the letter into my journal between blank pages. For now that was where it would live. Not erased, not answered, but acknowledged. My healing was still in motion and I would not rush it. In Gray Harbor, days began to settle into their own gentle rhythm. Morning coffee at Breakwater, afternoons designing websites from my cottage desk, evenings walking the cliffs until the sky bruised purple. The community pulled me in without pressing. Margaret recommended me to another shop owner. Sophia invited me to an art class and placed a brush in my reluctant hand. Diane, always steady behind her counter, made me laugh with her blunt humor. Here I wasn't the disappointing daughter, or the one who stayed. I was Elena, the woman who could draw a logo on a napkin and make it bloom into a brand, the woman who climbed rocks with strangers who became friends. I discovered joy in the small rebellions. Buying flowers for myself, leaving dishes in the sink overnight without fear of criticism, wearing colors my mother had once called too loud. Serena and I began exchanging cautious emails. No phone calls yet, but threads of honesty stitched between us. She told me about her children's piano recitals and her own private doubts about the life she had once called perfect. I replied with details about the tide pools and the bakery that made bread that tasted like childhood. Slowly we became sisters, not defined by comparison but by choice. From afar I learned my mother was changing in small, almost unbelievable ways. Serena reported that Evelyn had continued therapy even after the trust requirement ended. She joined a watercolor class at the community center, her sharp edges softening in ways that startled my sister. She even apologized, out loud, to Serena for dismissing her career once. I didn't know how to feel about these stories. Relief, yes. Sadness, too, that the mother I had needed at 15 was only arriving now that I was 31 and gone. Anger laced it all. Why had it taken my disappearance for her to change? Yet beneath the anger was a flicker of gratitude. Maybe my leaving had freed us both. I still didn't respond to her letters beyond brief acknowledgments through Colin. Boundaries were my scaffolding and I refused to dismantle them too soon. Healing required time, and I had finally learned not to rush for her comfort. One evening, Serena's email arrived with the subject line, "I need to confess." My chest tightened as I opened it. She admitted that for years she had turned a blind eye to my suffering because she feared losing her pedestal. "I thought if I stopped being the golden one I'd become the target. And I let you bear it all. I am so sorry." Her honesty cracked something inside me. Tears slid down my cheeks, not only from pain but from the relief of finally being seen. I wrote back slowly, carefully. "We both did what we had to do to survive. Maybe now survival isn't enough. Maybe we can choose more." It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the start of something neither of us had ever known: equality. By the 6-month mark, the cottage above the bay had shifted from temporary refuge to home. I bought it outright with savings and the remains of the house sale, painting the tilted porch rail and planting lavender that bent in the sea wind. Work thrived. I now contracted with 2 agencies and even hired a virtual assistant. For the first time, my creativity wasn't stifled by sighs or side eyes. It breathed freely, and so did I. Friendships deepened. Diane introduced me to her circle of women, each carrying their own stories of reinvention. Margaret, the lawyer-turned-bookseller, Sophia, the teacher-turned-artist, Lily, the widow-turned-hiker. We became a tapestry of survivors who stitched laughter into our seams. They celebrated my wins, mourned my losses, and demanded nothing but honesty. For the first time I knew unconditional belonging. Serena asked if she could visit. This time I didn't say no. Not yet, but soon. On neutral ground. Just us. I could feel the possibility of it without the weight of dread. Meanwhile, another letter arrived from my mother. Different again. Handwritten, the ink uneven, the words stripped bare. "I am proud of you, Mira. For choosing yourself. I wish I had taught you how. I cannot undo the harm, but I want you to know I see it now. I read it aloud to Dr. Patel. She asked, "What do you feel?" Confused. Hopeful. Guarded. "All valid," she said. "Healing doesn't mean flinging open the door. It means deciding what comes through." I tucked the letter into the same journal as the first, a growing record of change, hers and mine. On the 1-year anniversary of the dinner, I hiked to a hidden cove that appeared only at low tide. Waves smashed the rocks, relentless and beautiful. I sat on driftwood and let myself replay it all. The birthday wish that shattered me, the frantic planning, the lonely motel nights, the first coffee with Diane, the cautious emails with Serena, the letters from my mother that surprised me more than silence ever could. I realized something. I hadn't disappeared. I had appeared. For the first time in my life I was fully visible. To myself. My story was no longer written in the margins of my mother's approval. It was carved into cliffs, painted in sunsets, carried on tides. When Serena finally visited, we met in a cafe halfway between her world and mine. No mother, no children, no audience, just two women trying to stitch back something torn. She looked older than I remembered, not in years but in weight lifted. We talked for hours. About childhood, about the roles we had been forced into, about the guilt she carried. She cried when she told me she sometimes envied me for staying close to Mom, for being needed, not realizing how deeply it hurt. By the end of the day we weren't healed, but we were sisters for the first time. As we hugged goodbye I whispered, "We get to rewrite this." And she nodded, tears damp on her cheek. Reports from Serena continued. Evelyn had joined a support group for estranged parents. She was still sharp, still stubborn, but something had shifted. She apologized more. She painted watercolors of the bay, strangely similar to the view from my own cottage, though she had never seen it. Her letters became less about her pain and more about curiosity, asking about my work, my favorite hikes, my friends. I didn't answer them all, but I read them. And in reading I saw a version of my mother I had once dreamed of but never believed existed. Whether it was too late didn't matter as much as I thought it would. What mattered was that I no longer needed her change to justify my worth. A year and a half after the birthday dinner, I sat on my porch as the sun melted into the sea. I held a pen and wrote a letter, not to Serena, not to Evelyn, but to myself. "Dear Mira," I began, using the name I had buried but still carried. "You did the impossible. You chose yourself when every lesson told you not to. You survived rejection and found belonging. You turned disappearance into discovery. Be proud. This is just the beginning." As stars pricked the sky, I folded the letter and placed it beside the others in my journal. For the first time the story no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a map. And I knew wherever it led I would follow, on my own terms, with my own name visible at last. It had been nearly 2 years since I'd driven away from Willowmere when the phone I rarely used buzzed with a number I still recognized. I almost silenced it, but something made me answer. "Mira." It was my mother's voice, softened, almost unsure. For a moment I thought it was a trick of memory. "Yes." My throat was dry. I wanted to tell you this in my own voice. I finished my therapy sessions. Not because of the trust, but because I wanted to. Dr. Wolf said I should speak my apologies directly, not just through letters. I know I have no right to ask for anything. But I wanted you to hear me say, I was wrong. The silence between us stretched like a rope, taut with years of unspoken things. I thought of the woman who had humiliated me on her birthday, who had raised a glass to toast my absence. And I thought of the letters, the watercolor paintings Serena had shown me, the slow steps she had taken toward accountability. "You don't get to erase the past," I said finally. My voice shook, but it was steady in truth. "But I hear you. And I hope you keep going." She exhaled, shaky. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you." When the line disconnected, I sat staring at the waves through my window. For the first time I felt no weight pressing on my chest, no obligation to fix or explain. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. But it was a chapter closing, one I had thought would always stay open, bleeding. Serena visited again, this time in Gray Harbor. She arrived with a backpack instead of luggage, stripped of the armor she'd once worn. We walked the rocky beach, the tide retreating in foamy sighs, and she told me she'd started therapy herself. "I realized," she said, tossing a stone into the surf, "that I'd been carrying Mom's approval like a shield, and it was made of glass. I hid behind it while you took the blows. I don't want to do that anymore." I studied her face, so like my own in some ways. We both played our roles. I said. Now we get to choose new ones. We spent hours talking. About childhood nights when we whispered in shared rooms. About the silent wars fought at dinner tables. About the longing we both carried for a mother who never existed. For the first time, it wasn't comparison or competition. It was confession and connection. That evening, over mugs of Diane's coffee, Serena looked around the cottage. "You built this," she said, awe in her voice. "Not just the house. This life. I'm proud of you." I felt tears threaten, but this time they weren't bitter. "I'm proud of us," I said. And I meant it. Gray Harbor's annual Festival of Light came that summer, lanterns floating across the bay like stars that had stooped to listen. I went with Serena, Margaret, Sophia, Lily, and Diane, a circle of women bound by survival and reinvention. As we released our lanterns, Serena whispered, "For Dad." I nodded, remembering his warm hands, his quiet pride. My lantern carried a different prayer. For me. For the girl who once thought her worth was measured by absence. For the woman who now knows she shines by her own flame. The lanterns drifted, reflections trembling in the water, and I realized something profound. I was no longer haunted by the echo of my mother's disapproval. Her voice, once the loudest in my head, had been replaced by my own. That night, as fireworks painted the sky, Diane nudged me. "You know, Elena, you don't look like someone who disappeared. You look like someone who finally arrived." And she was right. Months later, another letter arrived from my mother. This one was different still. Short, almost humble. "I don't know if you will ever want me in your life again. But I want you to know I love you, even if I didn't know how to show it before. Whatever time I have left, I want to spend it trying to be better." I brought the letter to Dr. Patel. "Do I forgive her?" I asked. "Forgiveness isn't about her," she reminded me. "It's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight. You don't owe her reconciliation to forgive. You only owe yourself honesty." So I wrote back, not in anger, not in surrender, but in clarity. "I forgive you not because the past disappears, but because I refuse to let it define me anymore. Forgiveness doesn't mean reunion, but it means release. I wish you peace." When I mailed the letter, I felt something unclench inside me. Not closure. Life rarely gives that. But freedom. 3 years after the night that broke me, I sat once more on my porch overlooking the bay. The lavender I'd planted swayed in salt air. The porch rail I'd painted was chipped again, but it felt like mine. I thought of the girl who once begged for approval at every holiday, who measured herself by a mother's impossible standards. That girl had vanished, yes, but not into nothing. She had vanished into me. I was Elena now, Mira still, both and neither. I was a designer with clients who valued my vision, a friend among women who celebrated instead of competed, a sister rebuilding a bond from ashes. I was no longer the shadow in someone else's story. I was the author of my own. As the sun dropped into the Pacific, I opened my journal and wrote one final line beneath all the letters and notes I had saved. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is disappear from the roles that diminish us, so we can finally appear in the life waiting to be written." And with that, I closed the book. Not an ending, but a beginning.